The man dropped to one knee, his hand moving toward the torn waistband, and from a distance, it looked like the worst thing a man could do. The girl was tied to a cottonwood, her wrists raw, her breath broken, and there was no one else in the field. Heat pressed down hard, flies circled low, and the rope creaked every time she shifted. If anyone had been watching from far off, they would have sworn he meant her harm. Her eyes locked on his hand, a fear rising faster than pain saw. Spot. Don't look there. He looked anyway, just long enough, and his face went still. Like the prairie itself had stopped breathing. What he saw wasn't desire, and it wasn't skin. It was something that could get a person blamed, hunted, and buried without a name. Jed Mercer pulled his hand back at once and held it where she could see it. He told her to breathe, slow and steady, and said he was checking for a snake bite. In summer grass, rattlers struck high, and waiting could kill you quicker than shame. Shame. His voice didn't rush, didn't soften too much, and didn't rise, and it was the voice of a man who had lived long enough to know panic only made things worse. He'd spent years up in the Rockies as a mountain man, and the calm had stuck to him like old dust. She nodded, but her eyes never left his face. Out here, men decided who you were with their hands. The rope around her wrists was hemp, tied rough, the knot pulled hard. Jed didn't need time to read that sign. Anger made knots like that, not care. He cut the rope clean, once, then stepped back and turned his shoulders away. That wasn't politeness alone. It was survival. A wrong look could ruin a man as fast as a wrong act. When he turned again, she was trying to straighten torn fabric with shaking fingers. She couldn't have been more than 21, sunburned, dust-streaked, eyes too tired for her age. She said her name was Clara Whitmore. Quiet, like saying it might cost her something. She said her husband brought her out here at dawn, said he wanted to talk where nobody would hear. He tied her before she understood, struck her once to keep her still, then did the rest. He told her not to scream because screaming would make things worse later. Jed crouched again, careful this time, explaining each movement before he made it. He looked only where he had to, and no more, just above the hip, where the fabric was stiff and dark. He saw it clearly now, a small burn pressed fast, deliberate. The shape was a broken horseshoe with a deep notch cut into it. Men who worked cattle along the Santa Fe Trail knew that mark, even if they never spoke its name. It wasn't a brand for ownership. It was a brand for blame. Jed felt his chest tighten. That mark didn't just hurt, it marked a story. Cattle gone missing, paperwork altered, a dead man found where he shouldn't be. When the law came asking, the person with the mark would take the fall. A girl with that burn wasn't just beaten. She was set up. A horse stood tied not far off, shifting its weight. The saddle was cinched wrong, pulled too tight. Leather creaked in the heat. That was the work of a man in a hurry, or a man in a temper. Jed had seen both, and neither ended well. He listened past the insects, past the wind in the grass, for something else, nothing yet. But men who did this kind of work never came alone. The cottonwood stood by itself, branches high, bark scarred by years of passing hands. Jed's eyes lifted and found a fresh notch cut at eye level. Shallow, intentional, a meeting sign, the kind meant to draw someone close, meant to make sure they saw the wrong thing at the wrong time. Clara followed his eyes and shook her head hard. Tears cut clean lines through the dust on her face. She said that was the spot he warned her about. She said her husband wanted the helper to look. Once a man saw that mark, the trouble would choose him. Silas had left her there on purpose, so the first helper would carry the blame. Jed led her away from the tree, slow and steady, until the grass swallowed their tracks. He gave her water and kept her in the thin shade. Dodge City lay east, close enough to smell. Some men there would help. Some would judge. Some would hand her right back and call it order. Jed knew the kind of law that lived in towns like that. He also knew what happened to women the law didn't listen to. Before the story goes further, let this be said once and said plain. This tale is gathered and retold from old accounts, shaped to bring moral weight, human truth, and meaning beyond shock. The images used are created by AI to help carry feeling and time, not to replace truth. If this story isn't for you tonight, rest early and take care of your health. If you stay, and something here speaks to you, leave a comment so more stories like this can be told. Jed heard the saddle leather again, closer this time, and he knew the field had turned into a trap. He glanced at Clara's hands, the raw skin, the way she tried to hide the shaking. A man could pretend this was only a domestic problem, but the notch on the cottonwood said otherwise. That notch meant someone wanted a witness. It meant someone wanted a stranger to see the mark, then carry the blame when the wrong question got asked in town. Jed had seen that kind of trick before, years back on a trail where a good man ended up hanging because he looked at the wrong thing. He wasn't going to let it happen again, not to himself, and not to her. He told Clara to keep her eyes on his shoulder, not his hands, and to trust one simple rule. If he said move, she moved. No arguing, no apology. Then the wind shifted and brought a smell that didn't belong to grass or river mud, cigar smoke, town smoke, men smoke. And Jed understood the riders weren't lost. They were circling. Jed asked Clara if anyone saw him bring her out here. She shook her head, then stopped, listening. Somewhere beyond the rise, leather creaked again. A horse snorted. The sound was faint, but it was enough. The field felt smaller all at once. Jed straightened, weighing his choices. If he took her to town, the law might finish what her husband started. If he ran, the law would hunt him instead. He took a breath and made a decision that would follow him for the rest of his days. If the law believed her husband before it believed her, who do you think they would punish when that mark was found? Jed didn't wait to see who was coming. He took Clara by the elbow, firm but careful, and moved her down slope where the grass grew taller and the ground dipped. Out in the open, standing still was the fastest way to get found. He kept his pace steady, not running, because running told men you were guilty. Clara limped, favoring one leg, her breath shallow, but she didn't complain. Jed didn't need words to understand that. They reached a shallow wash where the dirt stayed cool and damp. Jed guided her down and waited there, listening. The sound came again. Leather, metal, a horse stopping, then another. Whoever it was had taken their time. That meant confidence. Confidence meant numbers. Jed leaned close and spoke low, just enough for her to hear. He told her they were going to Dodge City, but not straight in, not the way her husband expected. Clara nodded once. She didn't ask why. Women who lived with men like that learned not to ask questions until it was safe. They circled wide, keeping the cottonwood behind them, using a fence line and a dry creek to break tracks. The sun slid west, heat easing just enough to let a person think. Jed kept his eyes moving. He noticed things other men missed. Broken stem, a boot print too clean to be old. Someone was following, but not close, not yet. Clara finally spoke when they reached a stretch of hard ground. She asked if he was taking her back to her husband. Jed said no, not like that. He said the law came first, even when it got things wrong. She swallowed hard at that. Law was a word that hadn't helped her much so far. Dodge City rose out of the dust the way it always did. Wood fronts, canvas signs, horses tied 3 deep. The smell hit first, manure, whiskey, hot iron. Men moved slow in the street, watching newcomers without looking like they were watching. Jed knew that look. It meant trouble waited. It just hadn't picked a side yet. He took Clara in through the edge of town, near the livery and the feed store. Not the saloon, not the main drag. You didn't bring a wounded woman into a place full of drink and stories. He found a small room behind a dry goods shop where a woman sometimes patched folks up for cash. The woman took one look at Clara and nodded. She'd seen worse. She always had. Jed stayed outside, leaning against the wall, watching the street. A man came by twice. Same hat, same slow walk. Jed had seen enough to know they were being watched. He waited until the woman finished and Clara was resting before he stepped away. The sheriff office sat square in the middle of town like it always had. A place meant to be seen. Sheriff Caldwell looked up when Jed entered. Eyes tired, hand already halfway to a ledger. Jed told the story clean and short. Girl found tied, branded, husband involved. Danger of rustling outfit. Caldwell listened without interrupting, which didn't mean he believed it. When Jed mentioned the mark, the sheriff paused just a breath too long. Jed noticed it, and he didn't like what it meant. Caldwell said it sounded like a family matter. Said Marks could be explained. Said Dodge City didn't need trouble stirred up by outsiders. Jed asked for protection for the girl. Temporary. Just until things could be checked. Caldwell shook his head slow. Jed walked out, knowing how that would end. He made it 3 steps before a voice called Clara's name from across the street. Soft. Friendly. Too calm. Her husband stood there, clean shirt, steady smile, hands open like he was greeting old friends. Men nearby turned to watch. That was the point. Silas Whitmore spoke easy, said his wife had been ill, said she wandered when she was scared. He said Jed meant well, but misunderstood. He laughed once, light, and a couple men laughed with him. Jed felt the trap close. This was how it worked. Not fists, not guns, words. Witnesses. Claire stood stiff beside Jed. Her eyes stayed on the dirt. Jed didn't look at her. He looked at Silas. Silas met his gaze without blinking. That kind of calm didn't come from innocence. It came from practice. Sheriff Caldwell stepped out then, hands on his belt. He said he'd handle it. He asked Jed to move along. Said Dodge City didn't need trouble today. Jed understood the warning. So did Silas. Jed leaned close to Clara and told her they were leaving town, not running, just stepping aside until the law had to look harder. She nodded again, quick this time. Fear and hope mixed in her eyes, and Jed knew that look too. They left before dusk, heading southwest where the road thinned and the land opened up. Jed kept his pace easy. Men followed those who hurried. Behind them, Dodge City settled back into itself, already forgetting. Clara asked why he was helping her. Jed said some marks didn't belong on people. He didn't say more. Men his age learned to leave certain words alone. The sun dropped low, painting the land gold. Ahead lay miles of open country and choices that only got harder. Jed knew Silas wouldn't stop. Men like that never did. And somewhere beyond Dodge City, there were others who would recognize that Mark and come asking questions no one wanted to answer. Before we go on, if you're enjoying this story so far, this is a good place to subscribe. No pressure, just a quiet way to make sure you don't miss the next chapter. Pour yourself a cup of tea or coffee, settle in, and keep listening. And if you feel like it, leave a comment and tell me what time it is where you are and where you're listening from. They rode southwest until Dodge City fell behind them like a bad smell you couldn't wash off. Jed kept them on hard ground where tracks faded fast and the land stayed honest. Claire sat stiff in the saddle, hands resting light, learning the rhythm without being told. She was hurt, tired, and scared, but she listened. That mattered more than strength. They stopped near a low rise where the wind stayed steady and the view stretched far. Jed checked the horizon before anything else. Old habit, if trouble was coming. You wanted to see dust before you heard hooves. Nothing yet, just open land and heat. Claire asked where they were headed. Jed said away for now, then toward answers. He told her they would skirt the Cimarron River and follow quiet stretches of the Santa Fe Trail. Not because it was safe, but because dangerous men liked busy places. Quiet ground made liars nervous. Jed proved it before the sun even dipped. They passed a shallow bend where the grass looked ordinary, but the birds were quiet, and that was never a good sign. He slowed the horses, then took them off the line of the trail by 20 yards, just enough to make a watcher second guess. Clara didn't know why, but she followed, and that told Jed she was still thinking, not just surviving. A minute later, 2 riders appeared on the ridge behind them, not close enough to wave, not far enough to be harmless. They didn't charge. They just watched. That was worse. Men who rushed wanted a fight. Men who watched wanted a mistake. Jed kept riding like he hadn't noticed, because pride was a lever men like Silas loved to pull. He let the riders see his calm. He let them wonder if he had friends nearby. Then he leaned down, voice low, and gave Clara the plain truth. If they reached town too fast, the law would chase them. If they reached town too slow, Silas would catch them. He said it wasn't fair. Clara nodded once and said nothing, but her eyes stopped begging and started counting. They rode through the afternoon, the land flattening out, grass thinning, cicadas buzzing like loose wire. Jed pointed out things as they went, not like a teacher, more like a man thinking out loud. Where to cross without leaving prints, where water looked clean but wasn't, where men liked to wait. Clara listened, and for the first time since he found her, Her shoulders eased a little. They reached the river late, shallow and wide, the water slow and brown. Jed let the horses drink first, then Clara. She winced when she moved, and he saw her press a hand to her side. That mark was hurting her more than she let on, not just the burn, the meaning of it. She asked if other people had been marked like that. Jed said yes, though he didn't say how many didn't live long after. He told her those outfits like to make examples. Fear saved them work. Clara nodded, eyes fixed on the water. She already knew fear well enough. As dusk came on, Jed noticed something off. A set of tracks near the riverbank. Too fresh to be old, too neat to be accidental. Someone had crossed here not long ago, then doubled back. That meant watching. Jed didn't say anything right away. He didn't want panic riding with them. They made camp a mile off the water, tucked into a shallow cut where the ground hid firelight. Jed kept the flame low and ate standing. Clara ate sitting, slow, careful. She asked if her husband would follow. Jed said men like that always did. She asked how long. Jed said as long as it took. Later, when the stars came out and the land cooled. Clara finally spoke about the things she had been holding in, not all at once, just pieces. She said Silas never hit her in front of people. He waited until there were no witnesses, and she said he liked to remind her no one would believe her anyway. Jed listened without comment. Men his age learned when silence mattered. She told him about the book, the one Silas made her carry weeks ago, wrapped in oilcloth, heavy. He told her not to open it, told her not to ask questions, told her if she talked, she would end up worse than marked. She said she never saw the words, but she remembered the sign on the cover. A broken horseshoe. Same as the burn, Jed's attention snapped sharp. Books didn't travel with rustlers unless they meant something. Paper outlived gunfire. Jed said nothing, but his mind shifted. This wasn't just a husband hiding behind town law. This ran farther, maybe farther than Dodge City wanted to know. The next morning, they moved early. Jed kept them off the main trail, using the land like a map only he could see. By midday, they spotted riders far off, too distant to count, but close enough to matter. Jed didn't change pace. That was important. Men who sped up told a story they didn't want to tell. They reached a stretch of broken ground where the trail split. Jed chose the rough side. Claire didn't question it. She trusted him now, not because he promised safety, but because he never promised easy. Late in the afternoon, they saw smoke ahead, not camp smoke. Too thin. Jed slowed and studied it. A small fire, carefully placed. A signal, not a meal. That told him they were being invited. The woman stood near the fire, back straight, hat low, hands busy with nothing important. She looked like she belonged to the land, which meant she didn't. Jed approached slow, open, letting her see him clearly. She looked up, eyes sharp, taking them in piece by piece, not afraid, not surprised. She introduced herself as May Sutter, said she was waiting on someone who might not show. Her voice was calm, easy, like she talked to strangers for a living. Jed didn't argue. Clara watched her closely, noticing things Jed noticed too. The way May stood with weight balanced, the way her eyes checked the horizon before settling back. They talked around nothing for a while. Weather, roads, how hard the year had been. Then May looked at Clara's side, just once, quick. Her expression didn't change, but her tone did. She said there were marks a woman didn't earn by accident. She said some men were being hunted for less. Jed asked who was doing the hunting. May said people with badges sometimes, and people without them other times. She said there were outfits moving cattle that didn't belong to them, using wives and marks to scare off questions. She said one of those marks had shown up dead last winter, and the wrong man took the blame. Jed felt the pieces settle into place. May said if Clara went back to Dodge City, she would disappear quietly, not because the law hated her, because the law didn't want the trouble. She said there were bigger eyes watching farther south, eyes that didn't like sloppy work. If Clara wanted a chance, she would have to move before Silas closed the gap. Jed looked back the way they came. Dust hung low on the horizon now, too steady to be cattle. He counted heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. They were closer than he liked. May kicked dirt over her fire and said she was heading toward New Mexico. Said there was a man there who still read books instead of faces, a man who might care about paper and marks. She tipped her hat and started packing like the decision was already made. Jed turned to Clara and saw fear and something else mixed together. Not hope, not yet. Resolve, the kind that came when there was no safe way left. Jed swung into the saddle and took one last look at the trail behind them. Silas was coming. That was certain. What Jed didn't know yet was how many men were riding with him, or what Silas was willing to burn to get his wife back. And that was the thought that stayed with him as they rode after May, because men who put marks on women never stopped at just one lie. They rode hard behind May, keeping the distance just right. Too close, and you looked like trouble. Too far, and you lost the trail. Jed let May set the pace, because she rode like someone who had done this before and lived. Claire stayed quiet, her focus fixed forward, the way people do when they finally stop asking why. The land shifted as they pushed the south. Grass thinned, rock showed through, the wind picked up and carried less smell, which made tracking harder. Jed didn't like that. Men chasing didn't need scent if they had numbers. They stopped once near a dry bend in the Cimarron, just long enough to water the horses. May scanned the ground and frowned. There were more tracks now, not close, but steady. Someone was keeping them in sight without pressing. That kind of patience usually belonged to men who felt sure of the ending. Clara finally asked who May really was. May didn't answer right away. She said names mattered less than timing. Then she said she worked with people who still believed paper could hang a man faster than a rope. Jed understood that. Guns scared folks. Documents scared towns. They rode into the afternoon heat, the sun baking thought out of a man's head. Jed watched Clara closely. She was slowing, not enough to complain, but enough to notice. The burn on her side was angry now, and pain had a way of making bad decisions sound reasonable. Near sundown, they reached a small ranch, little more than a shack, a corral, and a tired windmill. Smoke rose thin from a cook fire. Jed recognized the place. He had traded water there once years ago. The owner was a quiet man who minded his own trouble. That made him useful. They didn't make it 10 yards before voices carried from the yard. Men's voices, more than two. Jed reined in slow. May stopped too. They listened. Laughter. Boots on wood. Someone felt at home. Silas stepped out from behind the shack like he had been waiting for them all along. Clean shirt again, hat brushed, smile easy. Two men flanked him, both armed, both relaxed. This wasn't a chase anymore. It was a meeting. Silas spoke first, friendly as a church door. He said Clara must be tired. He said Jed was making things worse than they needed to be. He said folks were starting to talk. Jed noticed he didn't raise his voice. Men with the upper hand rarely did. Claire froze, her breath hitched. The rancher stood back, eyes on the dirt, already decided. May shifted her weight, calm, ready. Jed felt the moment stretch thin. This was where most men made a mistake. Jed didn't answer Silas right away, but he looked at the men beside him instead. He looked at their boots. One had fresh mud from the river. That meant Silas had been closer than Jed liked. He smiled then, small and tired. Jed said Silas could take his wife home if he wanted. Said no one was stopping him. Silas blinked at that, surprised. Jed went on. He said the trouble wasn't Clara, it was the mark, the book. And the men who thought a woman made a good shield. The smile slid off Silas's face just enough to matter. He told Jed to mind his business. He told Clara to come stand beside him. She didn't move. That was the first crack. One of Silas's men stepped forward. May stepped too. Not fast, not slow. Just enough to be noticed. She said this wasn't the place. She said there were people who would be asking questions soon. Silas laughed at that. But the laugh didn't last. Jed saw it then. The way Silas's eyes flicked to the tree line. The way his hand tightened once on his glove. He was waiting for something, or someone. The rancher cleared his throat and said he didn't want trouble. Silas told him there wouldn't be any. Jed believed neither of them. He leaned close to Clara and told her to mount up when he said so. She nodded once, jaw set. Silas's voice changed then. Not loud, just sharper. He said Clara was confused. He said she had a habit of running when things got hard. He said Jed didn't know what kind of woman he was dealing with. That was when Clara finally spoke. She said the mark hurt worse every day. She said the book was hidden where Silas told her to hide it. She said she didn't know what was in it, but she knew why it mattered. Silas's head snapped toward her. Too fast, too angry. Jed moved then, not toward Silas, toward the space between them. He put himself where things would have to go through him first. May was already there, like she had planned it that way all along. Silas's men reached for their guns and stopped, not because Jed was faster, because someone else had spoken. The rancher. He said he had heard enough. He said he didn't want dead bodies on his land. He said Silas could take his business elsewhere. Silas stared at him, disbelief turning to calculation. He backed off a step, then another. He tipped his hat to Clara, slow and deliberate. He said they would talk later, when cooler heads prevailed. That was a promise, not peace. They left just as they came, easy and unhurried. Jed watched until the dust settled. Only then did he let himself breathe. May said they couldn't stay. Silas would regroup. Jed agreed. Hey, they packed fast and rode out before dark fully fell. Clara's hand shook now, the fear catching up. Jed told her she did well. He meant it. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. As night closed in, May said the next stop mattered. She said there was a place near Bent's old fort where men talked when they thought no one was listening. Jed felt the weight shift again. Whatever Silas was hiding wasn't small. And as they rode into the dark, Jed understood one thing clearly. Silas hadn't come to take his wife home. He'd come to see how much Jed knew. They rode through the night until the stars thinned and the land rose slow and quiet. May led them toward the ruins near Bent's old fort, a place most folks passed without seeing. Stone walls half fallen, earth packed hard by years of boots and wheels. A place where people once gathered to trade, argue, and lie to one another without meaning to. Jed liked places like this, not because they were safe, but because men talked differently when they thought history had already moved on. Clara rode close now, not from fear, but from habit. Pain had a way of shrinking distance. They made camp just before dawn, tucked against a low wall where the wind broke soft. Jed checked Clara's side again. Careful, quick. The burn was angry, but clean. It would scar. So would everything else. May stood watch, eyes always moving, never resting long in one place. When the sun came up, so did the sound of wagons. Not many, one, maybe two. Slow moving, heavy load. Jed and May exchanged a look. That was the sound they were waiting for. They moved to higher ground where the fort walls still stood waist high. From there, they could see the trail cut through the plain like a scar. A wagon rolled into view, canvas pulled tight. Two men walking beside it, no brand on the team, no markings. That told Jed plenty. Men who didn't want to be known hid their names first. The wagon stopped near the ruins. A third man joined them from the far side of the fort, dressed better than the others. Clean boot, soft hands. Not a trail man. Jed felt his jaw tighten. This was the kind of man who made trouble and never bled for it. May whispered his name. Hargrove, railroad middleman, paperman. Jed had heard of him. Men like Hargrove didn't steal cattle. They moved paper, so stolen cattle became legal by the time they reached market. They watched as the men spoke, voices low, gestures sharp. One of the wagon men handed over a small book wrapped in oilcloth. Hargrove took it without looking inside. He didn't keep it. He checked the seal, handed it back, and told them to move it by rail after dark. That mattered. He already knew what it said. Claire stiffened beside Jed, her breath caught. She said that was the book, the one Silas made her hide, the one he said could ruin people if it was lost. Jed felt the weight of it settle in his chest. Paper again. Always paper. May wanted to move in then. Jed shook his head. Not yet. Men like Hargrove needed room to talk themselves into trouble. They waited. Hargrove spoke longer now, his voice carrying just enough to reach them when the wind shifted. He talked about delays, about routes changing, about a woman who had been careless. Jed felt Clara flinch at that. Hargrove said marks were useful, but only if they stayed quiet. That was when Jed knew this went deeper than Silas alone. One of the wagon men asked what would happen if the woman talked. Hargrove shrugged. He said the law always found it easier to blame a nobody than a system. Jed felt his hands curl into fists, then relax again. Anger wasted time. Time was what they needed. May moved back, slow and quiet. She said this was enough to make someone listen. If they lived long enough to tell it, Jed agreed. The problem wasn't proof anymore. It was survival. They pulled away from the ruins before the men finished talking. By the time the wagon rolled out, Jed and the others were already gone, riding low through broken ground. Clara stayed silent, but her eyes burned with something new, not fear, anger. They stopped near midday where the land dipped and the air stayed cool. Clara finally spoke. She said Silas had told her the book meant nothing, said it was just numbers. She said she believed him then. Jed told her most people believed the wrong thing once. That didn't make them weak. It made them human. May said the book needed to reach a U.S. Marshal, not a town sheriff, not a judge who owed favors, a marshal who answered to someone farther away. She said Las Vegas, New Mexico. Jed nodded. That made sense. Far enough to matter, close enough to reach. The afternoon wore on, heavy and slow. Jed felt it before he saw it, the quiet tightening, the land holding its breath. He signaled to May. She nodded. Someone was close. They took cover along a shallow cut as riders appeared on the ridge, 3 of them. Then 4. Silas wasn't with them. That was worse. These were men sent to do work, not talk. The riders spread out, not rushing. Jed counted heartbeats. He weighed distance. Clara watched him now, trusting his hands without question. May shifted, ready. A shot cracked the air, hitting dirt close enough to matter. Jed didn't return fire. He waited. Another shot. Closer. These men weren't aiming to kill yet. They were herding. Jed moved first, pulling Clara down the cut, keeping low. May covered their flank, firing once, just enough to slow pursuit. They ran hard for a stretch of rock where hooves would slip. One rider cursed loud enough to hear. That was good. It meant frustration. They made it clear just as the riders regrouped. Jed didn't stop running until his chest burned and the land opened again. By the time he slowed, the riders were gone. For now, Clara sat on the ground, shaking and then laughing once, sharp and sudden. Jed understood that too. Fear sometimes needed a way out. May said they couldn't keep doing this, sooner or later. Silas would stop sending men to scare them and start sending men to finish it. As evening came on, Jed looked south toward New Mexico. That was where answers waited. Also danger. He knew Silas wouldn't let the book reach a marshal without trying one last thing. And as they rode into the falling light, Jed realized the next move wouldn't be about running anymore. It would be about who reached the truth first. They pushed south the next 2 days without stopping anywhere long enough to be remembered. Jed kept them moving at a pace that wore men down but spared horses. May rode ahead when the land opened. Behind when it narrowed. Clara stayed between them now, not because she was weak, but because she mattered. The land changed as New Mexico drew closer. The air dried out. The wind sharpened. Towns thinned into names on maps no one trusted. Jed liked it less the farther they went. Out here, help was rare, and mistakes stayed with you. They crossed into Las Vegas, New Mexico, near dusk, slipping in with a freight train and a line of wagons. Jed didn't like cities, but this one felt different from Dodge City. Less noise, more eyes. Men here watched quietly, the way men did when paper mattered more than fists. May led them straight to a narrow street behind the depot. She said the marshal they needed didn't sit where people expected. Jed tied the horses and stayed outside while May went in alone. Clara leaned against the wall, breathing slow, her hand resting near the burn without touching it. When May came back, her face told the story. Before her words did, the marshal would listen, but not yet. Someone had already been there asking questions. Someone with money and a clean story. Jed felt the ground shift under his boots. Silas had moved faster than he thought. Not riding. They waited in a small room above a feed store where the boards creaked with every step. Clara sat on the bed, staring at the floor. Jed stood by the window, watching shadows stretch across the street. May paced once, then stopped. She didn't like waiting either. The marshal arrived after dark. Isaiah Crow, tall, gray at the temples, eyes that had seen men lie badly and well. He listened without interrupting. He let May speak. He let Jed speak. Then he looked at Clara. He didn't ask her to tell everything. He asked her one thing. Where was the book now? Clara swallowed and said she didn't know. She said she had hidden it where Silas told her and never went back. Crow nodded like he expected that. He said paper mattered, but timing mattered more. He said men like Hargrove didn't move without protection. He said if they acted wrong, the law would eat them alive instead of the criminals. Jed understood that kind of law. It wasn't fair, but it lasted. Crow said Silas had filed a complaint. Said Jed was holding Clara against her will. Said there were witnesses ready to swear to it. Jed felt Clara tense beside him. Crow raised a hand and told her to breathe. Crow said this didn't make Silas right. It made him dangerous, and he said the next move would decide who the town believed. Jed asked what that move was. Crow said waiting. That answer never sat well with Jed. They left the office after midnight, the street quiet and tight with heat. May said Crow wasn't wrong. Jed said waiting gave Silas time. Clara listened to both and said nothing. She was learning how men argued without saying the real thing. The next morning brought trouble with it. Jed saw it in the way people looked at Clara. Too curious, too certain. Whispers traveled faster than horses. By noon, someone had spit near Jed's boot. By afternoon, a man told Clara she should go home to her husband. May came back, hard and fast, eyes sharp. She said Silas was in town, not hiding, walking free, telling his story slow and clean. Jed found him near the depot, talking to men who liked simple answers. Silas looked better than ever. Pressed shirt, easy laugh. He didn't look at Clara until Jed stepped forward. Then he smiled like he had been waiting. Silas said he was relieved to see his wife alive. Said he feared the worst. Said Jed had confused things. Men nodded. Stories settled in easy places. Clara felt the room closing again. Jed felt the old urge to end it with his hands. He didn't. That was the hardest part. Crow arrived before it went too far. He said everyone would calm down. He said there would be a hearing in the morning. He said Clara would stay where she was, not with Silas, not with Jed, with the law. That night Clara didn't sleep. Jed didn't either. May watched the window while Jed stared at the floor. Silas was close now, close enough to finish this the way he liked. Just before dawn, a knock came soft and careful. May opened the door to find a boy, no older than 12, hat in hand, eyes darting. He said someone wanted Jed to see something, said it was about the book. Jed followed him through back streets to a shed near the tracks. Inside was a man Jed recognized from the ruins near Bent's fort. One of the wagon men. He looked sick with fear. The man said Hargrove had 2 books, one clean, one dirty. He said the dirty one was moving tonight. He said Silas planned to burn the rest of the trail behind him. Jed asked why he was talking now. The man said he didn't want to be next. That answer was honest enough. Jed walked back toward town as the sun crept up. The air felt heavier than it should have. He knew what Silas would do next. Not run, not hide, force the law to choose. And as Jed reached the door where Clara waited, he understood the truth he had been avoiding. The next step would decide whether she walked free or went back in chains. Morning came hard and dry, the kind that made a man feel judged before he spoke a word. Jed walked back into town with the truth heavy in his coat and dust on his boots. Las Vegas was already awake. Wagons creaking, doors opening, men talking low. News moved faster than horses here, and Silas knew it. Clara sat where the law told her to sit, hands folded, eyes steady, trying not to look like a woman waiting for permission. Jed saw the brand pull at her when she shifted. Pain had a way of reminding you who thought they owned you. May stood near the wall, quiet, watching faces instead of words. Marshal Crow called the hearing small and quick. No crowd, no speeches. Just a room, a desk, and men who liked clean endings. Silas arrived early, calm as ever, with 2 witnesses who looked rehearsed. Hargrove did not show. That absence felt loud. Silas spoke first, easy and smooth. He said his wife was sickly. He said she wandered when frightened. He said Jed took advantage of that. He said he wanted her home, safe. Men nodded because the story fit the shape they expected. Crow turned to Jed and asked for his account. Jed kept it short, found her tied, saw the mark, moved her for safety. He didn't speak of anger. He didn't speak of fear. Facts were enough, if anyone wanted them. Silas smiled and asked about proof. He asked where the book was. He asked why a stranger's word should matter more than a husband's. Crow listened, eyes unreadable. This was the danger Silas liked. Rooms where truth had to wear a coat and lie came dressed light. Clara felt the room closing again. Jed felt it too. He could see the end coming the way he always could. Quiet, orderly, wrong. May shifted then, just a step, and Crow noticed. He asked if she had anything to add. May said there was a wagon moving tonight. She said it carried paper that didn't want to be seen. She said men were already nervous about it. Silas laughed once, quick, sharp. He said that sounded like rumor. He said rumor hurt innocent men. Crow didn't laugh back. Crow said the law would hold Clara until the matter was settled. Not with Silas, not with Jed, with the law. That word landed heavy. Protection and prison shared a thin line. Outside, the town breathed again. Silas stepped close to Jed. Smile low. He said this could have been simpler. He said Jed should have minded his own land. Jed didn't answer. Men like Silas fed on reaction. May pulled Jed aside and spoke fast. She said the dirty book was moving tonight by rail. She said if it disappeared, everything else would fold in on itself. Jed asked what Crow would do. May said Crow would wait for clean proof. Jed nodded. Waiting was not an option. They had hours, not days. Jed used them the only way he knew how. He watched. He listened. He noticed who walked where and who didn't. He saw Silas near the depot more than once. He saw a clerk slip Hargrove's man a note. Paper again. As dusk fell, the depot came alive. Lanterns swung. Men called numbers. Wagons lined up. Jed moved through it all like he belonged there. He had belonged in worse places. May found him near a stack of crates and pointed with her chin. A box marked feed, too heavy. Move too careful. That was the one. Jed didn't rush it. He waited for the moment when eyes went elsewhere. Then he did something simple. He tripped. A crate shifted. A lid cracked just enough to see inside. Books. 2 of them. One clean ledger on top, one wrapped tight beneath it, the dirty one. Silas's voice cut through the noise. He told Jed to step away. Men turned. Crow stepped into view at the far end of the platform. He had brought Clara to identify the seal in front of witnesses because her word had to be seen, not just heard. Everything paused. Jed lifted the wrapped book just enough to show Crow the seal. The broken horseshoe. Crow's face changed then. Not surprise, but recognition. Silas moved. Fast. Not toward Jed. Toward Clara, who had been brought to the edge of the platform by a deputy. That was the play. Always had been. Jed stepped between them without thinking. Silas's hand came up. Not with a gun. With the glove. A strike meant to provoke. Jed took it and stayed standing. Crow shouted for order. Silas shouted back. The town leaned in. This was the moment stories were born or buried. Clara spoke then. Not loud, not shaken. She said the book was real. She said the mark was forced. She said she would swear to it anywhere Crow wanted. Silas turned on her, rage slipping through the smile at last. That was enough. Crow ordered Silas held, not for guilt, for conduct, for now. The dirty book changed hands. Crow took it. May exhaled for the first time all day. Jed felt the ground steady a little. Night came down slow, the depot empty and the town buzzing low. Crow said this wasn't over. He said men like Hargrove didn't fall on one book. He said Silas would have one more move left. Jed knew that too. They walked Clara back through the quiet street. She didn't shake now. She didn't smile either. Freedom took time to feel real. As they reached the door, a deputy hurried up, breathless. He said Silas had asked to see Clara, said he had something to tell her, said it was urgent. Jed stopped cold. He looked at Crow. Crow looked back, tired and wary. Jed knew that look. It meant the next choice would cost something, because when a man like Silas asked to speak one last time, it was never to apologize. Silas asked to see Clara like he was asking for a glass of water. Polite. Calm. As if the room hadn't just turned against him. Jed didn't like it. Men who lost control didn't ask favors. Men who still believed they could win did. Marshal Crow said it would happen with conditions. Door open. Deputy present. No touching. Silas agreed too quickly. That was the first warning. They brought Clara into the small back room of the office, bare wall, one table, a single lamp throwing more shadow than light. Silas stood when she entered, hands folded, eyes soft, the same look he used when he wanted something. Jed stayed near the door. Crow leaned against the wall. May watched Silas's hands. Everyone watched his hands. Silas noticed and smiled. He spoke quietly, almost kindly. He said he never meant for things to go this far. He said men like Hargrove pushed him. He said the mark was a mistake made in fear. Clara listened without reacting. She had learned how to let words pass through without letting them in. Silas leaned forward just a little. He said the book would ruin more lives if it went public. He said towns would burn, families would suffer. He said Clara could stop that. All she had to do was say she lied, say she panicked, say Jed misunderstood. Jed felt his jaw tighten. Crow watched Clara closely. This was the moment that mattered. Not guns, not paper. A woman choosing whether to hand herself back. Clara looked at Silas and finally spoke. She said the burn still hurt. She said it hurt worse knowing he thought words could undo it. She said she wasn't afraid of towns burning anymore. She was afraid of living quiet and small for the rest of her life. Silas's smile slipped, just enough. His eyes hardened. He said she was making a mistake. He said she didn't understand how things worked. That was when Crow told him the conversation was over. They moved to escort Silas out. That was when he made his last play. Fast, desperate. He lunged toward Clara, not to strike, but to grab her arm, to remind everyone who he thought she belonged to. Jed moved without thinking. He stepped in and shoved Silas back hard. Silas stumbled, hit the table, and went down. Deputies were on him in seconds. The room exploded into motion. Crow's voice cut through it, sharp and final. Silas was restrained, wrists bound tight. The calm was gone now. So was the act. Silas shouted then. He said Jed had assaulted him. He said this proved everything. Crow didn't answer. He just looked tired. They locked Silas in a cell that smelled of iron and old sweat. He paced like a trapped animal, shouting promises and threats in equal measure. Clara stood outside the bars, shaking now that it was over. Jed stood beside her, close enough to steady if needed, far enough not to crowd. May came back from the depot with news. Hargrove was gone, left town before dusk. Took the clean book with him. The dirty one stayed behind. That mattered. But not as much as Jed hoped. Crow said this would turn into something bigger now. Federal eyes, long nights, slow justice. He said Silas would be held, but not for long without charges. That stuck. Paper could disappear. Witnesses could forget. That night, the town buzzed low and nervous. Jed sat on the steps outside the office, hat low, thinking. Claire sat beside him, wrapped in a borrowed shawl. She asked what would happen next. Jed told her the truth. Things would get harder before they got better. She asked if he regretted getting involved. Jed shook his head. He said some things followed you whether you turned away or not. She nodded, understanding that more than she wanted to, just before midnight. May returned again, breath quick. She said the man from the wagon was gone, the one who talked. Left town in a hurry. That was bad. Loose ends ran fast. Crow joined them, rubbing his eyes. He said Silas had a visitor earlier, a man claiming to be a lawyer. Crow didn't believe in coincidences anymore. Jed stood then, decision settling in his bones. He said they couldn't wait for morning. May agreed. Crow hesitated, then nodded once. Sometimes the law bent to catch up with truth. They would go to the depot again. Not to look. To be seen, to force Hargrove's hand. Claire stood too. She said she was coming. Crow said it wasn't safe. She said she had been unsafe for years. This was different. As they stepped out into the dark street, Jed felt the weight of the night press down. Silas rattled the bars behind them, shouting that they were making a mistake. Jed didn't turn around, because the mistake would be letting men like Silas decide when a story ended. They went to the depot not to hide, but to stand where everyone could see them. Lantern light spilled across wood and iron, turning the place into a stage no one asked for. Jed walked steady, shoulders square, not fast, not slow. Clara walked beside him, head up, breath even. A woman choosing how she would be seen. May kept to the side, eyes sharp, ready for whatever tried to slip past. Hargrove did not show. That mattered. Men who ran from light told their own story. Marshall Crowe took the book and sealed it in front of witnesses. Not speeches, not promises, just the quiet sound of paper being claimed by law that would not look away this time. Silas watched from behind bars as the town leaned toward a different ending. His voice carried once, sharp and bitter, then faded. Jed did not answer it. Some arguments only keep you tied to the thing you're trying to leave. Morning came clean, the kind of morning that does not fix everything, but lets you start. Clara stood in the light and felt the air on her face without flinching. Crowe said the process would take time. He said justice moved slow because it had to last. He said she would not be sent back. That was not a victory parade. It was something better, a door that stayed open. Jed helped Clara pack what little she had, a dress, a shawl, a few small things that mattered because they were hers. May tipped her hat and said their paths would cross again. Jed believed her. They rode out past the edge of town where the land opened and the noise fell away. Clara asked what came next. Jed said that was the right question, not where you came from, but where you choose to go. They stopped near a rise where the grass moved easy in the wind. Clara looked back once at the town, then forward again. She said she wanted to learn how to live without waiting for permission. Jed smiled at that. It was a good place to begin. I want to step out of the story for a moment and talk to you directly. I've been around long enough to know that most of us carry marks no one can see. Some were put there by people we trusted, some by choices we made when we were tired or scared. What this story reminds me is that marks do not have to decide the rest of our lives. They can become the place where we turn and say enough. I have learned that waiting for perfect conditions is another way of staying stuck. Change often starts when we stand up tired and move anyway, and I believe that quiet courage matters more than loud strength. Back in the story, Jed did not pretend he could give Clara a future. He gave her something smaller and stronger: time, safety, respect. He did not fix her life. He walked beside her while she took it back. They reached a small ranch where work waited and questions did not press. Clara learned the rhythm of days that belonged to her. She learned that pain could fade when it was not fed every morning. She learned that speaking once made speaking again easier. Jed stayed longer than he planned, not because he needed to be needed, but because he knew when to be present. He taught Clara what he knew about reading land and reading people. She taught him what it meant to listen without trying to solve everything. Silas faced charges that stuck, not all at once, not with drama, but with patience and paper and witnesses who chose not to look away. Hargrove moved on to places where his name did not carry weight. That is often how these stories end, not with thunder, with accountability. As the season shifted, Clara stood taller. The mark on her side healed into a scar that did not define her. It reminded her of what she survived, not what she owed. Jed watched from a distance, content with that. Here's the lesson I take with me, and I hope you do too. If you see someone hurting and you turn away because it is complicated, the harm grows stronger. If you speak when your voice shakes, the truth still counts. If you wait for the law to be perfect, you may wait forever. But if you work with it and push it forward, change can happen. And if you have been told your story does not matter, remember that silence only helps the person who benefits from it. I also want to ask you a few questions to sit with. Where in your life have you been told to look away? What mark are you carrying that no longer deserves your loyalty? Who might be waiting for you to stand beside them without trying to own their outcome? And what would change if you chose calm courage over familiar fear? I'm grateful you stayed with this story. If it meant something to you, take a second to like this video. It helps more than you might think. If you want to hear more stories like this, consider subscribing so they find you when you need them. And leave a comment if you feel like it. Tell me where you are listening from and what time it is where you are right now. I read more of those than you might expect, and they remind me why these stories matter. Jed and Clara parted one morning without big words, just a nod, just a shared understanding that the road keeps going. Some endings are quiet on purpose. They leave room for better beginnings. And as the land stretched out ahead of them both, the truth stayed simple. You do not have to erase the past to build a future. You only have to stop letting it decide who you are allowed to be.